Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Sorry for making you wait while we changed seating arrangements a few times here. We just wanted to make sure we could see the laptop for some slides we might want to show there. So just to ensure everyone's in the right place, this is the panel where we're talking about humans, AI, and discoverability. So I think it's the only panel on right now, so you're probably in the right place. My name is Mark Schollenberg. I work at RBC, and for the last 7 years, I've been part of the team that deals exclusively with tech and media companies here in Winnipeg. And I'm really excited to talk about these topics because they're close to my heart. And we've got a couple of great panelists here to share their expertise and thoughts when it comes to discoverability and AI and kind of all those buzzwords that we might be hearing about there. So I'll start by introducing Moyra Rodger, who's the founder and CEO of Magnify Digital. And Moyra has a ton of experience, both as a producer and an entrepreneur. You started your first company when you were 16, I understand, and then worked as a producer, producing for essentially every major network in Canada. And with Magnify Digital, is a strategy agency specializing in products and services that enable content creators and businesses to create purposeful, powerful, and measurable online footprints. So interested to learn more about that, but Moyra is certainly recognized as an industry thought leader when it comes to discoverability and cross-platform content. So thanks for joining us, Moyra. And we also have Katie MacGuire, who's co-founder and CEO of Vubble. And Katie started her career in journalism, working with CBC News as a producer for radio and TV. And in 2014, co-founded Vubble, which is an AI management platform that helps large media companies personalize the delivery of their content using AI. So you might need to explain that one a little bit after. So AI, discoverability, both really hot topics right now. And I think maybe let's start by getting a sense of where you guys as an audience are when it comes to these. So when we talk about discoverability, who's heard of that term before? Hopefully most of you, so that's good. Thinking of the projects that you're working on or for your company, who has a discoverability strategy in place? And excellent. And who's leveraging AI or machine learning or meta-tagging when it comes to that? So excellent. So perfect. You guys are in the right spot because we're going to learn so much more about that. But maybe let's start high level and let's just talk about discoverability strategy and what makes one efficient and kind of how to put that together. And maybe Moyra will get you to start with that.
Okay. First of all, I like to start with the definition of discoverability because I find sometimes we're talking about different things. It's been defined many different ways over the past few years. But discoverability, I think, is best articulated by two pieces, and that's placement and awareness. So you have to put your content where people can find it, obviously, that's the placement piece. And then the awareness piece is you have to drive demand for it, let them know that it's there. So I did bring a slide. If we can cut to the PowerPoint. So these, I feel, are the must-haves for a discoverability strategy. Clear objectives. We often talk about starting at the end, really knowing what you want to do. Is your purpose to drive broadcast ratings? Or maybe it's to build a video views online with the hopes of getting a deal. Maybe it's to drive box office. So you've got to get really clear on what your objectives are. Define your target audience and target audiences. Oftentimes you have a primary and secondary target audience. And this is something that's really important for most of the screen media funders too. They're looking for you to know who you're targeting. And when you are building your target audience, everyone is not an answer. Even if you have a project with wide appeal, the idea is to split it into niches so you can target your messaging. And then of course do research. Sometimes our gut instincts about our target audiences aren't always fully accurate, so you want to try to validate that online by looking at competitors. We'll talk about how you can validate your target audiences later. Have a channel map. Where are you most likely to be effective in engaging and reaching your audience? Just blasting content up across social media is what we call spray and pray. Sometimes it works, but it's much better to be laser focused. And your content plan. How are you going to approach content? And even if you're working with a broadcaster who's going to champion most of the discoverability effort, oftentimes they're going to expect to have assets from you. And so what is your approach to content going to be? Who's paying for it? How's it going to impact your production plan? And everything you do with your discoverability plan should be rooted in metrics. How are you going to measure success? And that's not just the vanity metrics like how many views your videos got, but how people engaged with those videos, how long they watched for, and so on.
I would add to that, just from a AI perspective or machine learning perspective, one additional thing to think about is what is your metadata that you're going to put around your content. And that metadata needs to match where you are going to be distributing your content. And I can get into metadata is just, it's the title, it's the date, it's the image, and it's actually a long list of things that you need to create around your content so that an algorithm can pick up on it.
Excellent. Thank you for explaining metadata there, because that was going to be my follow-up question.
Very sexy topic.
But when we're talking about AI and machine learning, maybe touch on, I guess, kind of how those two terms are related, but then also when we're talking about in the context of a discoverability strategy and you're talking about the placement and awareness, where does that fit in with that?
Okay, so machine learning is actually a subset of artificial intelligence. And in this context, it's probably easiest and best to focus on recommendation engines. So I always think of it as two data sets. You have a data about your content, and the platform has data about the audience. And they use machine learning to make predictions from the content spreadsheet to the audience spreadsheet. And different factors are weighted. So it could be that one of the things that the algorithm is looking for is what's the most popular content. It could be what is the search term that somebody has put in and which content relates to that. So,
Oh, that's great. So with when we're talking about discoverability and using the different tools that we have, and I know that we've got a lot of smaller production companies in the audience, when they're talking about discoverability, should they be thinking in the context of specific projects? Should they be thinking about their production company and their building their brand from that perspective, both? And how do those two work together?
It's a really great question, and one that a lot of our clients struggle with. I think the answer is often where the money is. And if there is any money for discoverability, it's often project-based, which is why producers focus on driving discoverability and online marketing for their specific projects. But I have to say, operating as a small business, it's really important to also take care of your brand. And for all the time that I ran my production company, I really didn't take care of my brand at all. I didn't build a mailing list. I didn't think about it because I lurched from project to project to project. And I think now, when collaborating internationally and collaborating even with domestic partners, it is important to have a strong brand presence online, even if it's just for credibility. And there's other reasons to to take care of your website beyond credibility. It's an opportunity to house something called structured data on some of your projects, which is a bit of a rabbit hole, but we can talk about that at another point or later in the day in the one-on-one meetings. But I think the bottom line is you really need to do both, and taking care of your brand online is a cost of doing business if you want to be a serious small business or medium-sized business.
That's certainly a great point. And I know when we were talking just ahead of the panel there, one of the comments you made said, when I was producing, I just worried about what CBC thought about the product. And then they worried about, how do we get it out there and all that. And so things have certainly changed quite a bit.
Well, we couldn't even, when I was producing, I didn't have any means to get to the audience. The broadcaster owned the audience. I couldn't get to them. And now we can. And now as we're diversifying our distribution deals, there is often the imperative for producers to try to build an audience. And even when you do have a broadcast deal or a theatrical release, I think it's really important that we have collaboration with those partners, because producers can bring a lot of value to a discoverability plan, even if the broadcaster has reach. And a broadcaster said to us not too long ago, why on earth would a producer want to be involved? Because we have 15 million uniques every month on our platform. And it seems like a really fair point on the surface. But there's many things. Like, it's up to the producers often to generate the assets. Producers can start the relationship with the audience earlier. They can maintain it often better between seasons because necessarily the broadcaster has to move on. There's issues around data. So there really are, I think it works in everyone's best interest to collaborate, and maybe collaborate to a greater degree than we're seeing right now with some broadcaster deals, particularly, I hate to say, in Canada.
I'm very interested to see the case study that comes out around Bird Box, because they have done so much with their memes, and their Bird Box is a hit that came out on Netflix over the holidays. They were very smart about their social media planning, in particular the producers. I don't know, could have been Netflix, but I'm looking forward to that case study.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so, Katie, I know your company, you work a lot with broadcasters and helping them get organized and leverage the power of these different technology tools. Maybe speak about how can some of the producers here plug into with what the broadcasters are working on and focusing on as well?
Okay, sure. So I can explain what we do at Vubble. We help, we work with, for example, Bell Media, and they have a great, massive video archive that does not have a lot of information on each video. So the very first thing we do is we ingest their video into our platform, and we actually have human editors that go through those videos and add tags. And I can actually show you our back end if you want to kind of dig a little bit deep. This is our back end. So a video pulls in here, and we have an editor that goes through, and they put on that category list is just a tiny little snippet of it. There's about 550 categories, so a person will select those. Eventually, that will probably be done using AI itself. There's a lot of research being done right now on object, like a machine being able to recognize objects inside a video. But as I was saying earlier, we were working with Seneca College, and they came to us and they said, listen, look, it can tell a chihuahua from a muffin, right? So it's not where it needs to be yet. Can you put on the next slide there, the persona? So then there's other than this is a tennis video, and that's a sports category, there's other factors that we tag. So for example, we're working with news content. We tag, is this a very heavy story? Is it a light story? It's a very simple interface there. So that's the tone of the story is something we do. And then we also assign each story a persona. And that's really, who is this piece of content intended for? And believe it or not, those are the categories. There's 5 of them at the bottom there that Cambridge Analytica developed. It's actually open source. It can also be used for good, right? It's a personality. It's basically what's the personality of this piece of content. And can you do the last slide? The other thing that we do, just with the rise of misinformation and fake news, we also give each piece of content what we call is a credibility score. So we look through for things like, do they name a source? Do they name the source to the degree that you can track them down? Is that source an eyewitness? And this is weighted so that if you get the top, if you have just the basics, there's a certain amount of points you get, and then for each sort of additional level of effort and quality, you get additional points on top of that. So those are the things that we do for a broadcaster's content. And then we have products where we pull in audience data, and we use machine learning to match this data to their audience. So I'm not sure that I answered your question there. So relating it to what people could do here, I think that when you're thinking about metadata on the content that you're putting out into the world, look closely at maybe the top performing content on, not necessarily the top performing content, because it might be a conspiracy theory, but the top performing content that matches sort of your audience and what you're looking for, and look at what they do. For example, we work a lot with ASAP Science. It's a YouTube channel, a Canadian YouTube channel. Look at what they do. I mean, they're obviously, they have the goodwill of YouTube behind them, but they do a lot to add a layer of information to their content that helps algorithms pick up on it and deliver it to their audience. And yeah.
And I would just add for producers, really pay attention to the delivery requirements of all your platforms, because they typically have, if you're delivering to Netflix, they have this something called the backlot, which is a website. They have very clear templates that you need to fill out for metadata. And when you're exhausted and you're just trying to get through your delivery, it's easy to kind of gloss over these delivery requirements. Not that they'll let you, but it's really important. Unfortunately, it's not universal. We were talking about that earlier too, per platform.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet. But you do have to look at how the broadcaster, the publisher, whomever it is, wants the metadata presented.
So when it comes to tagging, like those meta tags and adding that layer of information to your content, is that driven by the human creators? Is that driven by the AI? Where's that at right now, and who's kind of responsible for sharing that information and tagging things?
Well, at Vubble we use humans. I think humans do it best. I think if you're putting content out in the world, take that on, do it for yourself. Don't leave it up for, for example, YouTube will fill in a lot of the blanks, but not necessarily with what you want. I would say even like the transcripts that YouTube, the quality of them is so unbelievably poor. It's hard to sometimes even know what the topic is, and then they're kind of, I've seen on TVO has had, issues with kind of people going in and changing the transcripts, right? So I think it's at the moment, producers do not have the control that I wish they had. And I hope that, as sort of additional regulation comes in around algorithms, that pendulum starts to swing back to producers having more control. And I think the first step towards that is make sure that you're, doing the best you can to get a machine to recognize your quality content.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still in a very much in a time of transition, and if you listen to the companies that are putting out some of this technology, it sounds like, object recognition, facial recognition is there, and it's suddenly a piece of cake, and it's not. I was talking to a friend at CNN, because they seem to be able to pull up clips so quickly, and it's amazing how they said, a lot of the people here have been in the newsroom for a long time, and it's the humans that generate the keywords. If the example they said is Joe Lieberman is on the show tonight. And remember, he said something a few years ago about, whatever. And it's someone in the newsroom that says, check Nancy Grace. He was on there 6 months ago. And that human is generating the keywords that facilitates the search. So while we're moving to a time where archival assets, videos, and the video that we generate hopefully can have that metadata generated automatically, moving the job of the producer to one of quality control rather than someone originating content, I think it's safe to say we're not there yet. Yeah.
No, we're not there yet.
So hopefully that makes you feel better.
Yeah, there's a transition period. And even, I don't even know 5 months from now what will be the fields that will be the most important. I mean, one of the reasons why we developed our own taxonomy, and that's really what that is, that's called a taxonomy, is because it's just changing all the time, and at least we can then adapt this. So.
Well, it does sound like a positive story for a lot of smaller production companies, is where they can right now have a lot of influence on that data that they're attaching, and not just relying on the algorithms of the broadcasters, or the distributors, or the large platforms of what they're creating. Would that be fair to say? Is that at this point the creators can start positioning their project the way that they want?
Well, I think the pendulum is still on that you are at the mercy of Netflix and YouTube and Facebook's algorithms, and that is the way it will be for now. But I do think that just with what's happened in the last year, especially with Facebook, there is an appetite for regulation, and hopefully that will start swinging it back so that producers do have more control. I think we're just at ground level. Make sure that you're attaching the information that is high quality around your high quality content. That's sort of the step one.
Yeah, there's almost a mixed message here, because on the one hand, I want to say you're not too far behind, and on the other hand, I'm here to say, certainly for discoverability, it's now part of your job. And how many of you producers are already feeling stretched? Right, so it feels like we hear that a lot, it feels like one more thing that you've got to do, and unfortunately it is one more thing you've got to do. But when it comes to the AI part of it, it's still you're not too late. There's still time.
So when it comes to discoverability and starting to think about these things, what stage in the development or production should producers start thinking about this, and when does it become really critical and you're kind of past a point of no return that we can't go back and make changes?
It's super important to think about it as early as possible. When you're creating content now, it's incumbent upon all of us as storytellers to think about who we're creating that content for. And then, as I said, what our objectives are. And you want to start that ideally right in the ideation stage. Now, the way most of the funders are moving, they're requiring you to know who your target audience is, to be able to validate the target audience, and also to have a discoverability plan. So certainly, I would say the point of no return is when you're filing that funding application. And it shouldn't just be, though, the stick that you should do a discoverability plan only to get funding. Even if your project is niche, you want to think about who you're creating it for and where best to place it and how best to drive awareness around it. Otherwise, why are we doing it?
And I would add that the metadata piece, I mean, I would almost do that at the point of publishing. So you can have profiled your audience, you can have all these things in mind, but you really want it to be that up to date. I would look around as it's like the final detail, and that's like the thing that you really are like, God, do I have to do this? But yes, you do it. So it kind of comes at the end, because you want to look at best practices really at the end, because things shift. They shift every 5 months. Like it's really, yeah.
So on that theme of things changing constantly, and that's both within the media landscape and also just the technology in the online world, is where should folks spend their time? What platforms or technology should they get familiar with? Or is there some general concepts that kind of carry over across different technologies and different sources?
Certainly when it comes to discoverability, I think social media is the dominant platform because it's the one that we're most comfortable with and that we use. But I really encourage producers to think beyond social media for a lot of reasons. Building reach and engagement organically on social platforms now is very, very difficult. It's more of a pay-to-play world, so you don't get the same exposure that you would have 5 years ago. Not to say that it can't happen, not to say that people don't have success, but it does take a volume of content and pretty regular posting. And yes, there's exceptions. Someone invariably puts up their hand and says, what about Chewbacca Mom that went viral in a matter of hours? There are exceptions. But for those of us that have great content, that we want to build an audience around, sometimes social media isn't enough. Having a web page that will where you can put structured data, something called schema markup, which is another way that helps Google organize or identify your content. That's important. Search engine optimization can be very important. Newsletters, building. If you're starting off in a career or you're in a career where you're planning on doing multiple projects and perhaps going after the same audience, building a database can be very effective. When you're on social media, these social media platforms are the ones that own all of the information about your audience. You really don't have much other than some analytics. So it can often be very effective to gather email, provide a piece of valuable content or contesting or promo or whatever suits for your content, and start to build that database so that you can engage them in future. You can test ideas. You'll end up with typically with a sometimes small but loyal following that can be very useful down the road. Podcasts. There's so many ways beyond social media to engage the audience, and it's a lot to have to deal with, so either you train up someone on your team or bring expertise in your team or work with an external agency. And again, it's sort of a cost of doing business.
So when it comes to working with those external agencies, so someone like yourself, what should the creator come to you with? What are some of the questions that you're going to be asking in those initial meetings? About what have they thought about their audience, or what does their strategy look like? What are some of the things that are really helpful if they come with their initial thoughts on some of these pieces that are really helpful for you to do your work?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, it's about great content. That's what we love to see because we can't, no matter what fancy footwork we do, we can't save content that the audience doesn't want, that there's not demand for, that's simply not good. So we get really excited, and we are so blessed to work with some just amazing clients and amazing projects right now. So that's first and foremost. And then the questions we're going to ask you are going to be, who do you think your target audience is? What are your objectives? What are you trying to achieve? What are the milestones in your schedule? Do you have is there a broadcast date? Is there a film premiere? What's your strategy for distribution? What makes your project unique? Who do you think your competitors are, or who has complementary content, so we can start to look at best practices. We can start to look and try to understand online what audiences that are, what that audience that you're going after, what they care about, how they share, who the influencers are. Those are the kind of questions we start with.
That's great.
We work with broadcasters, and they need to come with the understanding that you need a taxonomy and that the time is now to really.
So with all these talks about some of these platforms and tools, is there any recommendations that you have, or maybe an example of a project or a producer or even a broadcaster that's leveraged a particular tool? So whether it's something very specific or, piggybacking off of another broadcaster's taxonomy, or is there any tips that you have from that perspective? Just kind of that
Give me a minute to
practical.
think about that.
I think the role of paid advertising is maybe underestimated in our budgets and in our mind. Paid search and social advertising can be very, very effective in jumpstarting views and driving reach. And the other thing I'd really like to talk about, and it's something we're starting to talk about at Magnify, and that is defining success. We see producers come in that have created fantastic web series. I mean, really high quality web series, and they have maybe $5,000 to spend on their marketing, and they're crushed when maybe we're able to drive 50 or 60,000 views for them, or maybe, I mean, we've got examples where certainly we've driven a lot more, but they don't wind up with Netflix pounding on their door, or they don't wind up with that broadcast deal. A lot of them have trouble getting second season, and I feel like there's got to be another measure of success. It doesn't mean they failed. It's that the objective wasn't realistic going in. If you have $5,000 to spend on marketing, unless you get really lucky and you have something unique in this universe of so much content abundance, the chances of you having that kind of success, maybe it's not very realistic. But then, we have, we worked with a documentary not long ago that was about an important mental health issue. And the reach wasn't massive. I think between the broadcast and what they had online with short snippet videos and whatnot, they maybe had 600,000 views. But the impact of that show and the kind of email and response they got was life-changing for certain people. So that to me is a success. So I would encourage you to of course we want the big deal. We want the money. We want the opportunity to work with these great platforms. But not every show is going to achieve that. And it pains me when I see producers feeling like they failed when in fact they've produced something really quite remarkable. And in some cases, certainly on the factual side, things that have really had a material impact on the life of the audience.
And on the, I guess one tip I would have is that it's the idea of taxonomies and stuff can be a bit technical and boring and also overwhelming at the same time. So I would recommend that the first thing you could do is look at some producers or some content that is doing really well with the audience that you're trying to reach, and pick maybe 3 to 5 things that they are doing that you can see to codify their own content, and just create a habit where you are codifying all your content with those 5 factors. And it might just be that it's a great title, a really fantastic image, a social media question attached to your content. There's the list kind of can go on. Maybe you're including links in a mental health documentary to original research. Pick 3 to 5 things, do it for every piece of content that you make. And once that becomes sort of your routine, you could go back to your archive and add those things also. So you just get in this habit of doing it so that it's like brushing your teeth. Like, it's not a great part of your day, but it's something that you do every time. And that would be my tip.
Certainly some great advice there, and Moira, I love your comments about how do you measure success for your project too, and what's realistic for, I feel like I've achieved something with this project and the goals, and that doesn't have to be, multiple follow-on seasons, or doesn't need to be 10 million views or anything like that. It's what is the threshold where you're satisfied. We can always be better, we can always push more. So maybe I'll pause for a second to see if there's any questions from you guys in the audience at all. So I'll just recap the question, give you a second to think about the answer there. And the question, if I'm understanding it, is really, in the US, we're seeing this a lot more. And so what does that dynamic look like on this side of the border?
So that's the experience that we've had, the same when we work with US broadcasters. And in fact, right now we're working with some international broadcasters, and they have a very different approach. I kind of hate to say it, but in our experience, right, which is not the experience with every broadcaster in Canada, but they tend to be more collaborative, and there's a different posture in dealing with the producers, and it happens earlier on. And I think, there's many great experiences that we've had working with Canadian broadcasters. But I think what happens here, and I don't know why, I don't know if it's because people are stretched, I don't know if it's because of sort of legacy thinking, but oftentimes it doesn't feel as collaborative. It feels like the producers are told, to stay in their own lane, and the conversations don't happen early enough. And as I said before, I truly believe, and I've seen evidence, that producers can bring a lot of value to the discoverability game, whether it's even, just providing assets to the broadcasters. And I hope that over time we move to a more collaborative, earlier, more proactive kind of relationship between producers and Canadian broadcasters. If there's any Canadian broadcasters in the room, I would love to hear from them. I can recap the question, yeah. The gentleman was talking about the United States spending on marketing being often tenfold, and what's being spent in Canada. I heard something really interesting recently that I wonder if it may get some traction, and it was from an executive at Disney, and he was saying, deliver 25 episodes and make the 26th episode content for online. And it used to be, when I started out in the business, it was called the Ghost 13, the Ghost 13th episode. And I think there's something to that. Like, I think we have to acknowledge that there is a cost to creating these assets online, no matter whose channels they're living on. And maybe that's an interesting way that we can start to think about it, because what's really, really difficult on producers is when they get left holding the bag for those extra assets. And in the original contracts, it's sort of like, well, of course, that's part of it's just like an extension of your EPK. Well, it's not. It's expensive. It's original content, and it has to be created in a way that matches the destination. So if you're creating content, let's say for a network's social media channels, for Facebook, for example, you can't just shoot short TV segments and think that that's suitable for Facebook. 85% of videos on Facebook are watched sound off. People give you about a second before they make a decision whether or not they're going to go past your video. So that long sweeping shot, establishing shot that looks fantastic on the big screen in your living room doesn't work for Facebook. So these are all considerations that affect the production plan, and the cost of producing these assets needs to be taken into account earlier on. So again, I think I don't have a great answer for you except to say I've seen what you're talking about, and I think we have to find ways to make sure that in Canada the need, no matter who again is posting the content, the need for that content and the funding of that content better align.
So I know we've only got a couple minutes left, but maybe I'll pass it over to each of you to share some parting thoughts or any last little tips, or if there's any things that the folks in the audience can take away with them, and when they're going back to the office tomorrow, can start really thinking about it with respect to a project that they're currently working on.
Okay, so I think the main way to think about machine learning is that it is not as complicated as it sounds. It is very long spreadsheets, and it is of data sets, and it is making predictions between them, and there's different weights. And it's something that sounds futuristic and it sounds out there, but it's not. It's actually just a magnified. Machine learning is amazing in that it can handle so much decision making with these massive data sets, but it is not a thing that doesn't apply to this industry. It is not a thing that every person in this room cannot get their head around and tackle with a few steps at this time. So that's what I think that the pendulum is going to swing. So don't lose hope. It is very hard, and it is super annoying that the platforms have the control that they do. But I think that over the next year we will start to see a shift. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I put together a slide, if we can go to the last slide. Okay, so these are the tips that I would say. Be platform savvy. When you're producing content online, as I said, know the destination and the conventions and culture of that platform so that you increase the likelihood of success for that content. Deliver for discoverability, as we've been talking about. Look to see what the requirements are, how to codify and then submit the metadata for the platforms where your content is being produced. Be prepared to pay to play if you want to drive reach on social media. Recognize that on certain Facebook pages, only 2% of the followers ever see your content. So those platforms are looking to satisfy their shareholders. They do that by driving ad revenue, and that means if you really want to drive reach, that you've got to pay. And as I touched on before, set yourself up for success by defining what you want to achieve with your particular project, and define success as early on as possible.
Those are some great tips there, and thank you both for sharing your thoughts on this. It's a huge topic, and hopefully we didn't overwhelm the folks there by adding to your to-do list for all the things that you're responsible of thinking of as producers and creators. But the goal was to try and demystify some of the pieces there and get you thinking about some of the tips from some of the experts. So thank you, Moyra and Katie, for sharing your thoughts and for being here at All Access in Manitoba. And absolutely, I encourage everyone in the audience to reach out to you two while you're at the conference here and approach them and ask them questions about your projects and find out a little bit more and dig deeper into this topic, because it's something that's certainly really important, and I think it's only going to be increasingly important in the industry for us. So thank you both for your help.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
1, 2, 1, 1. One, two. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And finally, podium. 1, 2, 1, 2. Check.
Good morning. So we're going to start the next session. Again, a very